Hi class, this video is intended to provide some additional instructions about how to navigate big data in a Microsoft Excel spreadsheet. I'm going to go over a number of different tools you can use to analyze data, to look at and find the things that you're looking for. And while this is not directly a cybersecurity skill, I think it's invaluable. The frameworks that we end up using are usually provided to us in spreadsheets, and they are massive. They have so many controls, something like the NIST CSF that has over 1,000 different controls. So being able to navigate the data is an important skill to have, and in fact is a key skill for completing Lab 4 that we started to look at in class. So this video is to try and review some of the skills that we were looking at in class. I've created a small spreadsheet with a limited set of data to try and make it a little easier to absorb, but ultimately you're going to need to work with the Secure Control Framework, Spreadsheet, and the CIS mapping for the second part of Lab 4. But let me start into some of these skills. One of the first things I want to talk about is simply searching. The keyboard shortcut to do a search is Control F. Control F, which brings up this search box. And I want to show that this document has a cell. We can already see there's a cell called coders. So when I say find next, it takes me to that cell. And if I click again, it doesn't go anywhere else. And what I wanted to point out is when searching, it searches only the worksheet that you're looking on. I'm going to close this for a moment. And I'm going to point out that at the bottom here we have a sheet 1 and a sheet 2. I created a sheet 2 with a partial set of my data, and it has the word coders here. So that is on both worksheets. But when you do a search, Control F to find, and search for something, it only searches the worksheet that you're on. So that's an important thing to be aware of. Something else I want to point out about searching is that sometimes you will be searching for partial pieces. For example, if I did a search for 27 as a number, and I say find next, it'll show me the cell that says 27. But if I click find next again, the cell 271, it's going to find that as well. And that's fine that it searches all occurrences. But imagine that you were looking for one number 27 in thousands of line and thousands of combination. Getting all these false positives, getting hits that don't relate to what you're looking for could be frustrating. So you can speed up your search if you know exactly what you're searching for. You can say match entire cell contents. By turning on this check mark, when you do a search, it will only take cells that have exactly those characters in them. So you want to be intentional about when to turn this on, when to have it off. Those are two things around using the search function. Another function I want to teach you about is the ability to filter. And we should probably talk about sorting at the same time because the button says sort and filter. So maybe I want to know and I've laid out my data here in two chunks, that there's foods and then there's places, and the types of numbers you run into are different levels, because this is what you run into in something like the Secure Control Framework, is every framework has different alphanumeric numbering systems. So I wanted to make sure we had different data. And maybe you want to see something, you want to know for the Hamilton column every value that's bigger than 200, and they might be mixed in places. So I can select the column, I can click on sort and filter and say that I want to do filtering. Now I've got this little box has been added. When I click on it, it lets me adjust for any of the things it finds in that column. So it has all the numbers that we saw, it has the blank cells. There's also a cell that has the letter X in it that I need for one of my later examples. But maybe we don't want to see the blanks. Maybe we don't want to see anything less than the 200s. Now I just have the 200s and the X when I say OK. Now it's a little easier to look at the data because now I can say Hamilton, numbers greater than 200. This matches up to my engineers and my artists. Obviously, this is a small set of data. If I go back to select all, we could have figured that out just by looking at it. But when you have a giant spreadsheet that spans 30, 40, 80 columns and rows going off the bottom of your screen, it can be much harder to find. Having used the filter, I can go back and turn it off to make it go away. It obviously would be possible for us to sort bits of data, but I should point out that when sorting, if I select this and say sort smallest to largest, it's going to warn me that normally it's just going to sort that data. It's saying, do you want to expand your selection so that you're sorting all of these things together? And so I can say expand the data and say sort. And now it moved everything. I'm going to use the undo function because if I had not done that, if I had just said sort smallest to largest and said continue with the current selection, it would have just sorted this data. And now I've broken the matchups that these 200s were supposed to match up to engineers and artists. Another way to avoid that warning is to highlight all the data that you want. And then when you're saying that you want to sort, you could do a custom sort. Here you have a pop-up that you can actually layer the sorting. I could say I want pasta from largest to smallest, and then I can add a level and do Burlington from smallest to largest. So that you can sort the data multiple times. Again, you're learning to float things to the top to find them. I'm going to cancel out of that. So the next thing I want to talk about, because I said floating to the top and finding things, if we're only looking at the information for Hamilton, we can click, drag across these columns. We could use a right-click option to hide them. Suddenly, it's really easy to match things up because they're side by side. We get a lot of our spreadsheets where you have labels at the start and the data you want to look at is all the way on the far side of the screen. Don't hesitate to hide some of these columns. And again, you've downloaded a spreadsheet from a website. You don't need to worry about contaminating it. You can just re-download it if you have to. So make all the changes, remove the data that's in your way until you can find the data that you're looking for. Now I can right click and say unhide and actually that'll unhide one. I believe if I double click, that'll unhide them one at a time. There we go. So we have all my columns back. Sorry, I'm just checking my list of functions. So we did the search, we did the filter and sort, hide and show. Next thing I wanted to give you guys as a tool, again, this idea that sometimes your label is on the far left, your data is on the far right. A trick you can use is to select a line and simply use the paint bucket to highlight a whole line. This again makes it easier for you to see exactly the thing you're looking for. So if one control number puts you on line 29 and then you're going to have to follow that line to the far side, you'd simply select the line, give it a color. And this is an easy way to be able to follow across as your cursor moves. Speaking of cursor, I'm going to take a moment to talk about navigation. So I've been using my mouse to change which cell I'm in. But I'd like to point out that the arrow keys on the keyboard will move you left, right, up, down. And there is a modifier for this, that if I push the down arrow, it goes one cell. If I hold the control key on my keyboard and push the down arrow, it will go to the bottom of the current data set. So if I do it again, control down arrow, it goes to the next set. If I add a few numbers here with gaps, it will move between the gaps. So down arrow only moves one, but control down arrow, control down arrow, control down arrow, control down arrow. So the control down arrow can be a really good way to look for where is the data in a column, especially if you have a lot of gaps. Though I would say if you have a lot of gaps, I would go back to the filtering option and just have it hide all your blanks. And then suddenly you have no gaps. Now you may also run into a lot of duplicates. Another way to work with the data is to pull it out of the spreadsheet. Let me reset my filters. In fact, I will turn off the filters. Here, if we were being asked for what are all the unique numbers here, well, we could try and start pulling them out, copying them one at a time. But a trick I would suggest is if we highlight all of these and use the copy function and use another program, something as simple as WordPad. And here I'm going to do edit, paste. I can even, once they're here, zoom in a few times. And immediately I see 5, 5. I can backspace one of those out. 18, 18, 2, 2. Oh, there's a duplicate 3. Oh, there's 2 4s. Oh, another 18. By extracting the data and looking only at what you're working with, it's just, there's less confusion, less distractions. Don't hesitate to do these as you're trying to find the things you're looking for. That's very much what this video is about, helping you find specific things. Let me check. Okay, next tools to teach you about. I've talked about the fact I've used a small set of data, but I want us to think about when your data is very, very large. So obviously right now when I scroll down, my data disappears off my screen very quickly because I only have a little bit. But you've seen spreadsheets, I'm sure, where as you scroll, it just continues going. And if you have headers across the top, losing those headers can make it hard to understand what you're looking at. We can freeze rows and we can freeze columns. This is done in the, I have to remember where it is, in the view section. Yes, freeze panes, the button's right there. The way this works is you first select a cell that you want to be inside the data that moves around. So I don't want engineers to move, I don't want pasta to move, so I'm going to pick the 17. If I then tell it to freeze panes and freeze in both directions, 17 becomes the corner of my data. When I scroll down, I still get these. And if I start panning to the right, I never lose those names from here, other than when I scroll down this way. And again, if we panned far enough this way, we start losing our headers at the top. But it's this idea of being able to lock in a certain amount of data. So if this data continues to go down, 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 I'll still be able to read the food names. I'll still be able to read the city names. And if you want that to go away, you can simply go back to the freeze option and choose to unfreeze. And you can freeze pretty much anywhere. I could select this, freeze panes, and now I'm keeping the data that's up here, I'm keeping the data that's over here when I go up, down, or if I start going to the side. As somebody who works with a lot of spreadsheets, I tend to use the freeze option in the vast majority of the spreadsheets that I work with. Next tool, and really looking at my list, this is probably the last thing I want to talk about, is when you're trying to look around, when you're trying to understand a spreadsheet, keep an eye open for those little corner marks there. Here I've left a comment, and you can do this anywhere, that I could right click, insert a new comment, tiger cats are the best, and say OK. In the controls lists that we get as spreadsheets in cybersecurity, often there will be comments on different parts of the spreadsheet that tell you how to use certain columns or how to use certain rows. So don't ignore those comments. Take time to look for those comments. They will probably give you a lot of clues. Oh, actually, there is one other piece. I just remembered I had another thing on my list. I showed you guys this idea of copying and paste to be able to get some of this data out. But I wanted to warn that sometimes you'll encounter almost what I would call hidden data. This is the number 11. I can see up here that it is the number 11. That's the only thing in the cell. If I copy it and then go to Notepad, remove everything I had there before, and paste, I just get the number 11. But I had intentionally created a cell here where we see this AC1, and here it only shows AC1. But if I copy that cell, and then here I edit, paste, there's actually a lot of data here because this was a cell in which they've embedded extra information. Now, this should be set up where they should increase the height of this row. I've specifically shrunk it to show you what could be hiding. If I increase this, you'll see that there was a lot more data than what we expected to have there. Working with some of the control spreadsheets, it is not uncommon to find a cell which will only be about this tall. And it's not until you copy out the data, or if you double click on the cell to see all of its contents, then you see everything that's in it. Sometimes there'll be clues, such as if the height creates sort of a half line, but don't hesitate to copy and paste to another program when you're trying to get those things out. Plus, it can really help get it formatted the way you want to be able to submit it with the assignment. With all that said, I'm going to take just a moment to bring up the actual secure control framework and show where the skills I just showed you relate directly to navigating this spreadsheet. So this spreadsheet has multiple worksheets. The SCF 2024.3 is the actual set of controls, all the matchups. If I pan all the way back to the left side, the SCF controls and their control number. So these are the numbers. We could search to find one of these numbers. We could search for specific numbers. We already have filters. They have given us the option. I'm going to actually pan over a little bit. Something like the NIST CSF functions, they are grouped amongst these categories. So maybe I'm looking only for the detects. I could select all, detect, say OK. Now I see only controls that relate to detect, and I could even continue to pan over to the right to get into our other controls, such as ISO 2701, NIST, PCI DSS. I could see which of those are part of the detect group or are part of any of these groups. That's the filtering. The show and hide, some of these columns, the brown columns here, these are, and actually I'll check the comments to know what they are. These relate to maturity models. The assignment really doesn't ask about any of these. So these columns, I could highlight them, right click, hide them. I can get them out of my way. You'll find for the assignment, the orange headered columns, these are really the frameworks. And there's certainly a lot of frameworks here we never touch. This AI CPA, it's not one that we touch. It could also be hidden. Highlighting rows, like I was saying, if I pan all the way back to the beginning here, so we're back to columns ABC. If I'm looking up AAT-10, I could select the row. I can make the whole thing yellow. Now it's going to be easy to follow it as I pan to the right on the spreadsheet. Some cells may not change colors if there are color rules applied to them, but we can follow most of these. That was the highlight. I've done the hide show. I talked about searching. I'm not going to re-show that. The freezing the columns, they've already frozen the column. They've frozen the headers, but they haven't actually frozen the secure control domain. So it would be possible for us to adjust the freeze here so that top bottom has a freeze and so that left right would have a freeze as well. And I guess the last thing I'll do here is the arrow keys to navigate around. When all the cells are full, our arrow keys move around just fine. But if we start panning to the control, some of these orange columns, I'm hitting a blank area here. And I wonder if the whole thing might be blank. Now I could use the filters. I can actually now see that there is more than just the blanks. I could remove the blanks to only see what's there. But instead of doing the down arrow key, I'm going to hold the control key on my keyboard and down arrow, and that will jump me to the next chunk of actual data in the spreadsheet. And this is a good example here because we've got 4 in a row. So when I control up arrow, I go to the top of this set. If I do it again, I go to the next set. Now, if I control down arrow, I go down to the next set. Control down arrow gets me to the bottom of that set. This is a very useful way to navigate on the keyboard around. Okay, I think I'm going to stop here because we've covered some of this in class, and you can rewatch this video as many times as you need. But I definitely think these are skills you'll want to spend time practicing. Hopefully this helps you with Lab 4, and I look forward to seeing you guys in class. Take care.